In the chapter Important Literature from Forrest's book, The Thrill of the Chase, Forrest talks about a number of novels. One of those novels is The Great Gatsby. Forrest wasn't impressed by The Great Gatsby. Among other things, he describes it as small and really thin. Forrest couldn't understand how such a big-name author could get by with writing such a little book. Forrest said the same thing about For Whom the Bell Tolls. This is only one of the clues that there is a hint lurking somewhere in Forrest's words. Forrest is probably the first person in history to describe those books as small and thin. The character J. Gatsby reminds me of Forrest in a lot of ways. Both Gatsby and Forrest grew up poor, made a name for themselves, and became wealthy, and they were both considered new money where they lived. There is an air of mystery around both figures. They both moved to a location where they had no significant ties. Who is this person? Where did he come from? Where did he get his money? What's his history? People would make up and exaggerate stories about Gatsby in order to further the mystery. People did, and still do, make up and exaggerate stories about Forrest. Contemporary legends attached themselves to both men. Interestingly, both men seem to welcome much of that attention. Of Gatsby, the book says, just why these inventions were a source of satisfaction isn't easy to say. Forrest hints at these exaggerations with his quote, "I wish I could have lived to do all the things I was attributed to," and Forrest was attributed to have done quite a bit. Both Gatsby and Forrest entertained other high-profile individuals, those with both new money and old money. Gatsby often had parties where these individuals would show up and Gatsby would just stand off to the side observing. Forrest wrote of much the same thing, with him entertaining political figures, entertainers, and artists. Both Gatsby and Forrest seemed unhappy about their educational background. Both Gatsby and Forrest volunteered for the armed service. Both served in a war. Both were at the rank of major when they left the service. Both received awards for their service by their own government as well as foreign governments. Both Gatsby and Forrest traveled around the world. Both were collectors. Both came close to death a number of times, but seemed to bear an enchanted life. Gatsby's full name was J. Gatsby. Gatsby was born as James Gatz. James Gatz was the son of poor farmers. J. Gatsby was James Gatz, reinvented. From the book it says, "So he invented just the sort of J. Gatsby that a 17-year-old boy would be likely to invent, and to this conception he was faithful to the end." This brings to mind Forrest's quote that, "It doesn't matter who you are, it only matters who they think you are." It didn't matter that J. Gatsby was really James Gatz. People only knew the man J. Gatsby. Regardless of whether the name remains the same or is changed, the person who you are inside may not be the person that is presented to the world. There are a lot more parallels between the book The Great Gatsby and some of Forrest's stories. Here are a few more of those. The overall setting for The Great Gatsby is on Long Island Sound near Gardiner's Island. Gardiner's Island, of course, should be seared into the mind of every serious Forrest Fenn treasure searcher. The Great Gatsby bounces back and forth between two locations, the East Egg and the West Egg. These eggs are described in the book as unusual formations of land separated by a bay. The West Egg was where the people with new money lived. The East Egg was where the people with old money lived. This should bring to mind the line of the poem, "and hint of riches new and old." Gatsby's house was at the very tip of the West Egg, only 50 yards from the Sound. For what it's worth, the number 50 comes up a lot in the Great Gatsby story. There was a 50-year-old man in the story, not Gatsby, who fixed the 1919 World Series. That was the year when members of the Chicago White Sox, including shoeless Joe Jackson, were accused of conspiring with gamblers to throw the World Series. 2 years earlier, the White Sox beat the New York Yankees in the 1917 World Series. When Gatsby was 17 years old, he met his mentor, a man by the name of Dan Cody. Cody was 50 at the time. They met when Cody's yacht dropped anchor along the shores of Lake Superior. This, of course, should bring to mind Forrest, his brother Skippy, and his friend Donnie, and their adventure to capture Cody the buffalo with a heavy boat anchor rope. Jay Gatsby and Dan Cody spent 5 years sailing around the world before Cody died. Gatsby drove a big yellow car. In The Thrill of the Chase, one of Forrest's bosses when he was a child drove a big yellow car. In fact, there are a number of yellow cars mentioned in The Great Gatsby. For some reason, the author of The Great Gatsby seems to really like the color yellow. There are yellow cars, yellow spectacles, yellow windows, yellow bugs, yellow bricks, yellow cocktail music, yellow dresses, yellow hair, yellow trolleys, yellow trees, and yellow lights. As a boy, Gatsby had a book called Hopalong Cassidy. As an adult, Gatsby was in love with a woman named Daisy. Forrest pretended to be Hopalong Cassidy when he got his new Daisy air rifle. If you look to the 1974 film The Great Gatsby, there are even more coincidences, if you want to call them that. In the same chapter of The Thrill of the Chase where Forrest mentions The Great Gatsby, he also mentions Robert Redford. In that chapter, Forrest says that if Robert Redford had ever written anything, he probably could have done it better than the guy who wrote that Gatsby book. One thing interesting about that quote is the connection between Robert Redford and The Great Gatsby. Robert Redford was the star of the 1974 version of the movie and played Jay Gatsby. I personally took this as a high probability that Forrest was hinting at least two things. First, Robert Redford did write a book called The Outlaw Trail, and that book was likely to hold a hint or two. Second, this reinforces the probability that The Great Gatsby also contains hints. Another possible connection between the film and Forrest is with Ralph Lauren. Ralph Lauren got a big break in his career when he was asked to design the men's costumes for that movie. For those who don't know, Forrest counted Ralph Lauren as a friend. According to Forrest, one time Ralph was at Forrest's house looking to purchase a particular Indian bonnet. Forrest told Ralph that it wasn't for sale. Ralph said, "You have so many and you can't take them with you." Forrest replied, "Then I'm not going." It's really interesting how many parallels there are between Forrest's stories and The Great Gatsby. There are obviously a few hints scattered in the book, and probably the movie. One problem with these connections, however, is because there are so many of them, searchers can easily be misled to think that The Great Gatsby supports something that it does not. Some people will see all the references to yellow as pointing to Yellowstone. Some will see the character of Cody as pointing to Cody, Wyoming. Unless Forrest had a major influence in the writing of The Great Gatsby, these connections cannot all be meaningful. Cherry-picking the connections that support a preconceived solution while discarding all other possibilities is nothing more than confirmation bias. It will not help a weak solution. It may give you a slight dopamine hit, but it will not lead you to the poem's end. There are ways to confidently weed through all that noise, but it can be like trying to walk through a minefield. Sometimes it's a better idea just to go around it instead. By the way, the song at the end of this video is from the 1974 film The Great Gatsby. Thank you for watching.
When you and I were 17 and life and love were new, the world was just a field of green, neat smiling skies of blue. That golden spring when I was king and you my wonderful queen. Do you recall when love was all and we were 17?